All right, everybody. Welcome. Today, I am with Al Kietzmann with Copier Consulting. He is the CEO and owner of that company. And we are going to talk about some strategies that you guys might not think about in your income statement that you are not carefully scrutinizing to the level of detail that you need to. And we're going to give you all of those tips and tactics today. Welcome to the show. Who are the buyers? So who are the clients and what's the big problem?
The buyers are in almost every vertical market. They tend to be a mature market. Therefore, they are healthcare, they're legal, they're financial services, insurance, churches, or religious schools.
So these are large organizations that have massive complex printing needs, and they don't even realize how much money they're really, pushing down the drain when it comes to printing costs. So the huge pain point here seems to be that this is something you probably don't, as you're just probably a busy admin or a manager at one of these companies and you don't want to think about it. You probably don't think about it. And they don't even realize what they've signed up for, but there's potential savings of several $100,000 perhaps.
Correct.
And you've actually done that.
Correct. I have.
Yeah. So that's a serious thing that I think it's one of those hidden things within a business that people don't notice or think about that has a huge impact on the bottom line.
Yeah, in copiers, I mean, if we're honest about it, is not an exciting topic. People don't get thrilled about copiers and printers. They consider them, many people tell me they consider them a necessary evil in their business model. They know that they're expensive at some level, depending on who I'm talking to in the organization. They feel that they probably were hosed. They didn't get the best deal. They're not necessarily thrilled with that contract, but they know they're stuck with it. They'd like to know their options. What they typically know is what they see on the face of these type leases. They see a monthly payment and they see a term. They may or may not see that structure. And if they do see it, they may not understand what that means. They do read some of these terms and conditions, the fine print on the leases, and then explain to me what they believe that it means. But what they don't really understand is what the formulas are and parts availability is for these devices. So most of the leases are structured for 5 years or 60 months. They tend to last significantly longer than what these terms are. I have a client that I recently worked with, a for-profit chiropractic office that had a mid-volume copier that was 15 years old. And they had what I would consider average volume for a business, whether that's a for-profit or nonprofit. And when they see just the monthly payment on the on the contract, they don't know what the original finance amount was or the original loan. The industry doesn't disclose that formula to them. It's an unregulated industry, so they don't have what we might come to know when we buy a house in the form of a truth in lending document.
Mm-hmm.
So the rates that are used to formulate these payments are almost always not disclosed to the buyer. Therefore, they can't determine what the original loan amount is, nor do they understand the formula of the residual component that's built into that.
Yeah, it's how actually most people are with contracts of any business, right? They don't even know what they're signing up for. They don't know the principal, the interest, the details of the term and the agreement. Most people, when they sign their first house, that's how they think.
Right.
So it's not unusual for me to think that, someone that's making a massive purchase for printing systems, that they would be doing the same thing that they would do when they go to buy a house.
Correct.
That they're just going to okay, this is boring, legal, blah, blah, blah. This is what you think I'm going to pay. But I think what people will run into down the road is that they'll see, okay, so we've got an issue in operations management where now we have to cut costs and we have to find lean thinking, and they're all thinking of lean Six Sigma manufacturing. How do we lean out all this stuff? What they're not thinking about is, well, what's some low hanging fruit? What is our office expenses? How do we lower some costs like that? And I think that this is some low hanging fruit that you bring to the table. It's like if you're in this position where, hey, we got to cut costs. What are some ideas we have? Let's brainstorm some thoughts. That's something no one's going to think right away to do. They're not going to think, oh, what is our printing costs?
Mhm.
What does our printing system look like? What did we sign up for? Because that's been thought through. That's just in the past. So it's like, it's almost a new way of bringing that in to the discussion with some of these managers that are always being pressured to figure out how we can cut operating expenses.
Mhm.
And this is one option that people have working with you. And as you're explaining, they don't even know what they've signed up for, or this could have been an agreement that was years ago with different managers or different people, right?
That's exactly right. And, I've done some light research through LinkedIn and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what I have found to be the case in a lot of cases, 90, 80, 90%, maybe the 80-20 rule applies. 80% of the cases that where one person signed the contract, at the end of that 5 years, they're not even employed with that organization anymore. So we don't have any luxury of going back to that person
Yeah.
to get some kind of an
You
idea.
got a 60-month lease on this. I mean, that's 5 years. That's turnover every 2 or 3 years with a lot of people.
That's exactly right. That's what I found on LinkedIn, and Bureau of Labor Statistics said people change jobs every 4 years. So
And most managers like, oh, the printer works. I don't know. I never thought about it. They don't
Correct.
realize though, they just get this massive bill at the end of the
Mhm.
at the end of the year with all their operating expenses for the building.
Correct.
They don't think to itemize down to printing and copiers. And that's, I think, a really easy win for a lot of people, that they could just, okay, let's just at least call this guy, figure out, can you save us money? I mean, it's just a no-brainer if you can figure out a way to save money. What were like some of the biggest wins that you've seen doing
Well,
this?
at one point, I was auditing for an expense reduction company in North Carolina remotely from my home office, and we looked at many, many different hospitals across the country.
Yep.
And in this particular case, it was $456,000 that they saved. They had
$500,000.
That's correct. They had 59 copiers. They had 399 desktop printers. They had a contractual obligation with their incumbent vendor for $29,000 a month. And that client, the procurement manager, who also worked as materials manager in this particular hospital, said, we'd like to include the incumbent vendor, but we ought to go out and get 3 different alternate bids from different vendors. And that $29,000 contractual obligation that they were under for the incumbent deal, again, 59 copiers and 399 desktop printers, came back at 16,330, 16,300, 20,000, and 20,000 respectively. So the incumbent vendor was looking at this as a way to keep their client, and became very clear that they needed to be transparent and operate in the interest of full disclosure. And that resulted in $12,000 plus per month in savings over 3 years. That contract netted them $456,804 of real, genuine raw savings. Another case was a West Coast hospital that had 333 copiers. That is to say, the floor standing multifunctional device, and 3,600 desktop printers. And their legal department, IT department, and the entire C-suite was on a call with my partner in North Carolina. And they said, we know that we are not getting the best deal, and asked us to review the contract. And I read 200 pages of those contracts that they had, and found 40 line items, 40 areas of their existing contract that I said, if I was buying, I'd be really looking at this. I wouldn't agree to this, or I would change that. I would seek this remedy over that remedy. And it is still on a case study on this company's website, this former business partner of mine, and they believed it was $1.2 million in savings. So those are the larger cases. Now we're doing this in Wisconsin, and that's where I'm based, in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. And so I have cases that are closer to me where I have the testimonials from the city of Fond du Lac and the city of Beaver Dam that were over 100,000, 117 and 120,000 respectively.
What's that like? Give me the idea of the size of some of these companies you're working with. Like, what is that as a percentage of the savings on their operating income?
Yeah. So historical savings, I've tracked it on every case, ranges from 22 to 52%. And one machine deals have been 20 to 30,000 in savings. Like for like, apples to apples, no change in their features, benefits, or any aspect of their accessories have been removed to artificially lower that price to make it look better. That doesn't happen. They've all received equal to or greater equipment, features, and benefits and still saved money, improved the contract, eliminated the waste. And what happens a lot of the times in this other example, this is a for-profit CPA felt that his contract at 38,000 was very, very good. He felt pretty good about it and said he felt he could go out and do a better job than I could. And that's fine. And I let him, and I said, no harm, no foul. Please do so. If you're interested in a conversation after you found that, I'd be happy to review that for you free of charge. And if I found any areas of that proposal as a result of your efforts of communicating with your vendor that are suspicious and or areas that I would find we need to continue to improve or maybe modify or ask more questions of the vendor pool, then I will do that for you free of charge. So the owner of this CPA firm did that, and his 38,000 became 37,000, and it was about a 4.2% savings. And
That's what he did.
that's what he did. He felt pretty good about that. And I said, well, I think we could do more and better. And my value proposition to you and all clients, for-profit, nonprofit, doesn't matter the vertical market, is that I'll read and review your contracts without an upfront fee or retainer. And I only paid on the savings in the end, and the clients will always get twice as much as I charge, guaranteed. So then when I wrote our proprietary RFP, the request for proposal, 40 plus questions, sent it out to the incumbent vendor and 3 alternates, that 38 and 37,000 analogy became 17, 17, and 15. And then one did not even answer the questions.
So how come when you send out a proposal to the same incumbent vendor, it's less? Why is it just because they know they got to win your business so they can underbid their current, like what is
Well,
the reason that they're less?
I would say it has a lot to do with the fact that I personally have a core value of transparency, full disclosure, so they can go to my website or LinkedIn profile and they know who I am, what I do. They know I have a background in copier sales. It's now evening the playing field. We're changing the status quo of how organizations buy. And I collect and share data and information from prior cases that these clients don't have. And I tend to know which vendors we need to call. I understand how we need to write the RFP and what time frame we need to get this project or the scope of the project
So by
completed.
putting those details into your RFP and all those things, it almost shows these different vendors like, okay, this guy knows what he's doing, so they know they need to bid this more aggressively. Because like in this case, what is it, $38,000 with the same vendor, and it goes down to $17,000, 52% savings, just with the way you wrote this up.
That's
So
correct.
there's a strategy in what you do that's different. What you do is unique, but it's also, I think, is it like the way you write it makes these vendors realize this guy, we can't bluff him, like we can't add the extra zeros onto the end of our bids because he knows what's going on.
Yeah, I believe that to be the case.
Right. And I think that's something that's really an interesting skill because you see that in contracting businesses of all kind. It's like someone can, I mean, you see this with your mechanic. I mean, my wife, she doesn't know much about, how trucks work or anything like that. So she goes and takes my truck in, and the guy says, oh, you need an air filter, you need to clean out these headlights, you need to do this and that. It's like, no, we didn't. I just put a new air filter in there last time we did. I got our oil change. It's like, I
Sure.
don't need that. And she's like, oh, but he showed me some dust or whatever. It's the same thing, just blown up on a massive scale. It's like they take advantage of people that don't have the insight and know-how and the detailed understanding. I think what you're bringing to the table is you're dropping these little nuggets into the discussions in these proposals, and you're saying, listen, I know how to play this game. You better give me a good price. And then these guys say, okay, we'll get you the good price. And I think that's a very valuable thing that goes underlooked in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately happens. What happens also in these cases, in addition on this particular chart, is that the incumbent vendor when the owner of the company felt good at 38 and got that $37,000 proposal or a 4% savings. When I looked at it, the proposal was vague and not fully transparent, and the totality of spend was not disclosed. There were 31 omissions. That made me very concerned on behalf of my client.
What do you mean an omission?
They didn't address or were not fully disclosing all aspects of the
So
contract.
it gives them some flexibility to where they can kind of, beef in if it came time to litigate, they would be on their side.
Well, if this client, yeah, I think that's the case. But what happens in these omissions often is that it leaves room for price escalator opportunities of the future. They could
The project
increase.
creep kind of thing.
Sure,
Right.
absolutely. And when I look at these terms and conditions on these contracts, often is language there that says they reserve the right to increase any portion of it and or service up to X amount percent. And if that occurred and they then signed it and it happened to be a non-cancelable, or irrevocable structured lease, they're stuck. And it's very important that they get all of these questions that I ask answered. Now, not every vendor wants to cooperate. In this case, this alternate vendor had 39 of the 40 questions unanswered. Well, they were instantly eliminated because how in the world can this CPA draw a conclusion if they don't even answer the questions that we're asking on their behalf? And so the incumbent vendor eventually lowered their price from 37 to 17. They dropped to 20,000, but still had 25 omissions. They didn't answer all the questions that are relevant to formulating the totality of spend over the next comparative term. In this case, it was 60 months to 60 months. So my fear was that although there had the appearance of a $20,000 savings,
they could just creep it up and if they needed to, because they got the room. They've maneuvered the contract in a way that they've got the room to do that.
Yes, to the best of my knowledge, that happens in almost all cases that I've read. So then,
is that like the business model with some of these big printer copying companies? I mean, like, do they do that? Is that's their way of how they really make the difference on the margins? Is in not to say that they're all out to get people or cynical or whatever, but is it the model to just say, yeah, we've got room for scope creep and we're going to increase some of these costs over time and people won't even realize what they're paying for after a while?
I feel that way, and I feel that way because of the 15 years I was in the industry as a sales rep. I was trained to do that.
Really?
From 3 different copier dealers. Yeah, so those core values that I was raised with, and we haven't talked about it, but my dad owned an auto parts store. As a kid growing up, I saw solid, stellar core values in business. And, I'm like anybody, I think, that you go to school, get a good education, get a job, you don't quit, you don't give up, you just keep pushing forward. Well, I did that for 15 years. But that went from 92 to 2007. I had enough. And I was recruited to a very large financial services firm, and I got out of the copier industry. And when I got out of it, I was calling on those clients that I had sold copiers to be my new financial services client. And they said, well, we don't want to buy that, but we're going to buy a copier. Can you help us buy it? And that happened 7 times. And every one of them, I saved money. And then that entrepreneurial spirit kicked in, and I created Copier Consulting LLC. It is everything that we know today. Everything we're talking about, I've been doing it for 11 years.
You're almost like the guy in those movies, like Catch Me If You Can or something, where, you got the criminal that they can't, he's so elusive, he gets away. And then eventually the FBI is like, look, we want you to work on our team. It's almost like that. You used to be a sales guy kind of representing, like you knew all the tricks. And it's like, look, now I'm representing you. Now I'm representing the small business owners, or I'm representing these large organizations that are looking to save costs, that are being pressed and pushed on lean Six Sigma and lean manufacturing. And how do we, trim our margins to the best of our ability? And now it's like, now I've got the inside. I'm an insider. I know how they do it. And here's how you can play defense.
And you know what's really scary for the copier buyer in the state of Wisconsin? That 2017 testimonial that I gave in front of Consumer Protection was wonderful, but I was told that there would never be any follow-up hearings by the Senate. Therefore, there will never be a law. So that Assembly Bill 684 or Senate Bill 580, I believe it was, from 2017, where I testified, and dealers and a lobbyist, I believe, is what their title was, testified in opposition to the law. The law at that time said, if the buyer wrote a letter to the leasing company saying, hey, I want to know my parts availability on this copier model, and I want to know what the formula is in the lease, you have to give it to me in 5 days or the lease becomes null and void. That is to say, this non-cancelable, irrevocable language goes away. Well, they don't have a mechanism to go backwards anymore. And because of that, they don't have a vendor watchdog in the government like you would find with financial services, mortgage, real estate. Even cosmetologists have to be licensed in Wisconsin. The copier industry doesn't require licensing, continuing education, any sort of oversight committee like you'd find within FINRA or the SEC or the Office of Insurance Commissioner. Those oversight committees that I was responsible for when I switched out of this into copier industry into the financial services was where the light bulb went on. I mean, to get the job at the financial services company, you go through a background check, you go through fingerprint records, you go through all kinds of things. I never experienced that in the copier industry. And so it just kept building from there that I thought, hey, there's a great opportunity that the buyers in this market, especially in Wisconsin, and the lobbyists that testified in opposition to that law had made a statement, something to the effect that this would set precedents in the country. Well, I took that as a badge of honor. I thought, well, that'd be fantastic. That's the right thing to do. I mean, we're regulating all this other stuff, and I'm not a regulating or a regulatory guy. I don't find the government getting involved in our business is a great exciting thing, but I just think there ought to be a mechanism. And so there were cases where clients would say, just file a report complaint with the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection on our part. And the investigator would say, we understand what you're doing. We understand Assembly Bill 684, but there's no law, there's no teeth. We can't help you. So the buyers are stuck. They don't have, a vendor watchdog per se. And so we just feel that it's important that they have access to us. That's why we're doing this. I want to spread this message that these buyers need to have or should have at least minimum awareness that we're out there, that we do care passionately for the copier buyer. That is to say, also, there's great sellers in this market. There's great servicing dealers. They're wonderful people. But at the end of the day, if they have that luxury of writing these contracts and those tend to show themselves in the best interest of the seller, sold on the illusion of simplicity, as I call it, in a monthly payment with no disclosures of the totality of that deal, i.e. they didn't answer all the 40 questions that I think they ought to be asking, well, they will find these omissions. They'll find price escalators. And in this particular case, we're talking about one copier, mid-volume, 35 page a minute became a 45, same accessories. This vendor answered all the questions. There were no omissions, and they saved $19,700. So that was good for that buyer, and they liked the machine. So whether it's one machine or it's hundreds of machines, we've seen a lot of these contracts. There's a lot of predictable metrics. A lot of the terms and conditions are the same. And absent somebody's involvement that was in the industry, was trained in this, that buyer probably won't receive the most fair and reasonable contract and pricing, in my opinion. I just don't believe it.
How much? So for a normal, like kind of your normal clientele, I guess, I imagine people that go through a lot of paperwork, right? So you have CPAs, legal, hospitals, things like that. Do you, how much of their budget is normally dedicated to this before they meet with you?
So when I was selling in 92 to 2007, and as I've been a independent vendor neutral consultant, I have read reports from the same reporting agency that 1 to 3% of annual revenue is allotted or budgeted for internal printing.
Really?
1 to 3% of annual revenue is a guide, and it's been sold that way. It's still discussed.
Is that just any industry?
I believe, to the best of my knowledge, that's what this report is all
So
about.
then obviously there's certain industries that have significantly more than that, right? I mean,
Presumably, I mean, it's possible. It could be less too.
right. I mean, like I'm a millennial, I don't use paper, but then there's like other companies where you have records and like I can see a law firm just going through enormous amounts of paperwork, right?
Yeah.
Things like that. But that's really a lot more than I would have thought, to say upwards of 3% just on the average is what your expenses are for internal printing. That's pretty unbelievable, but it makes sense, like even on a micro level. I mean, if you're a millennial like me, everybody had the old printer, and then you got to go buy the ink, and then eventually you just throw the printer out because it's so frustrating, and then you end up printing over at Office Max or something. But anyway, that's
Yeah.
yeah. But the point is that 3%, and if you're saving a lot of these different clients up to 50% of that, you're talking about a percent and a half you could be taking off that full operating income, or those full operating expenses right there. That's pretty dang significant when you're looking as a business owner to cut costs, and especially in a mature business that's been around for a little bit, and you're looking at tightening, flipping over rocks, looking for cash. What can you do with that extra income? I bet if I flipped it around and I said, look, I can get you an extra percent and a half on your profit this year, people would be like, oh, goody. Yeah, that goes from 9% to 10.5%. That's a big deal to me. Why is it not the same on the opposite side of this? And I think this is a serious opportunity opportunity that people can look at. Because what is the but like, this is just so obvious, it's cut and dry of like, this is something that could work, especially if you're in the industry that you use a lot of, that you're spending money on this. What is the reason that people don't find you, or like, is it that they just don't think about it because it's boring, because it's not top of mind? What's the big problem? Like, why don't people think about this and try to cut costs in the internal printing area?
Well, I think that it's probably the challenge for other expense reduction specialists as much as it is for mine. It's unique. It's a unique business model. It's very niche, or as you millennials call it today, niche.
Niche,
Yeah.
French, yeah.
Well, whatever you want, however you want to pronounce it, doesn't bother me. I just think that people aren't aware of it. And of course, when anything is new, I think even myself as a buyer in other products and services, we entertain it. We do our own research. But if we feel fairly adequate that we can do our own research, ask the right questions, draw our own conclusions, we probably will, because we think that, well, it might be too expensive. And I understand that. I feel that same way. But what I've found in my model works for these companies, because I'm not charging anything up front, no retainer, no upfront fee. Under contract, I am operating as an extension of their procurement and purchasing division, department team. I like to consider myself on their team, but not the payroll. And my goal is to fully understand what their needs, wants, and desires are with the equipment, first and foremost. We want to know what this current contract is, because in almost all cases, I think is the beginning of a problem that can be improved. The contract can be improved, waste eliminated. And so they just find that value at the end to be solid. It's um, just a great value. And a thought that I just had right now is, there was a church up in Green Bay that we recently worked with, and within minutes of sitting down and comparing their contract to their invoices, I found a glaring $6,000 overcharge. It was just obvious to me, and they received a refund from the vendor within a week or two, I believe it was. And they had no idea. There's many times there's multiple people dealing with this. One negotiates, one signs, one pays the bill. You can sprinkle in all kinds of
Right.
analogies, and if there's not communication going there, or a full understanding of these terms and conditions, I would say that that creates the problem. And so, why don't more people call, or why don't more people want to do this? I think that's kind of like that $64,000 proverbial question. I'd love to know. But my business associates in expense reduction spaces like telecom, shipping, freight, employment retention, mobile for cell phones and tablets, find the same thing. I mean, it's a marketing and advertising challenge, but it's again another reason I want to do this podcast with you, is to be able to create another mechanism for people to be aware that we're out there. And so, as we attempt to introduce ourselves, this will maybe satisfy some of the questions that they have, and find that my method of operation is purely for their best interest, that it is complete transparency, full disclosure, that we have a proprietary process of asking these 40 plus questions, and we're going to equally compare the vendors. And in nearly every case, not all, but nearly all, we have found the contracts improved, waste eliminated, and financial savings or gain, cost avoidance, some people call it, in the next contract for our clients that they won't be committed to.
Do you do this with like other contracts, or is it exclusively printing copy? I mean,
It's exclusively copiers and desktop printers. But as I mentioned, the affiliate business partners in telecom, waste, mobile, shipping, freight, employee retention, there's other expense reduction companies like me that do this. They also worked in the industry that they are auditing for and being a buyer advisor for. And I enjoy those conversations with those people. What's very interesting to me is the stories are all about the same. The messages and the problems and the solutions are eerily similar.
right. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's like, let's say somebody is a buyer right now and they're looking to kind of rehash a new system, or they're looking to upgrade or whatever. What are some things that they should look for that are red flags? Like, what are some real quick, like, that's a problem, this is a problem, this is what you should look for?
Yeah. So what people know the most is what they see the most, and it's that type of a contract and the invoices that are associated with it. And if they're unable to find a truth in lending document, any type of disclosure that says how this monthly payment and term was derived based on the structure of their lease. If they're unable to find that, and or if they're curious about ways to save money, if they feel that they're paying too much, or they just found this process to be unsettling, or that they didn't think that they got the best deal and they wish that they did, and or they wish they knew somebody that um, worked in this industry and has that experience. I think it's a breath of fresh air for them that they're not having to go about the negotiations on their own. Again, I like to say I'd like to be an extension of their purchasing or procurement team on their team, but not their payroll. And if they're unable to find the interest rate and or what the original loan was so that they can conclude what that interest rate might be, that would be a call to action. That would be a reason why we'd want to get involved. And this analogy here had a client that had a $650 a month payment for 60 months, just like this particular contract. Knowing the rates and what the residuals were approximately, I was able to just do the simple math and come up with the loan amount and the residual value. So their lease, similar to this, was 10% interest.
Mm.
And they had service built into that monthly payment. They had a bundled amount of usage that was allocated for black copying and printing, monochrome, or color output. And it was sold to them as free copies in that payment. It came with a use it or lose it scenario that if they did not use that bundled amount, it would not be credited or carried over. And that interest rate, 10%, which by the way, I found it ranges anywhere from 9 to 22%. You would be
22%.
Yep.
People are paying.
Yep.
And they don't even realize
They
it.
don't. And they're paying that on the labor. This included the service and the toner. So they were paying that financed amount not only on the equipment, they were paying it on the service labor as well as the toner, and sold to them as a convenient payment. Earlier, I called that the illusion of simplicity.
It's almost like a crooked car payment, like a crooked car lease kind of situation. I mean, a lot of people recommend don't lease your car for the same kind of reasons, is that, you're paying, they're bundling in maintenance, they're bundling in interest, and it's holding, you're paying a lot larger than you would have gotten for the value of your car if you would have itemized it all out and done it on your own. But that still seems to be, the convenience still seems to be valuable for people. I think it's the convenience is not valuable enough for this, is so it becomes the gap between, should I say, convenience and the price you're paying is not the same proportionally to what you would get on like a car lease or something like that. And that's what this kind of reminds me of as you're breaking this down. It's a very similar setup. I mean, even when we first met, when I was looking to buy a printing system here, and I just told you, I said, look, we're a co-working space. I'm not sure how much we're going to use this or whatever. And I just remember Googling, do I want to spend a lot of money on a printer, or should I just like lease this thing? It'll be a monthly payment. I went through this exact same thought process that probably a ton of your clients have. And I just was I'm like, what's the cheapest, like, kind of printer I can get that's not just your normal off the shelf Office Depot printer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the payments were something like $200 a month to lease it, and the printer itself is like $350. And I sat there scratching my head a little bit, and I'm like, at this little baby level, just a little tiny baby level, the same printer I can buy outright for $350, and I'm leasing this thing for almost $200 a month. Why wouldn't I just buy it? Because in a month and a half, it pays itself off. I can imagine what happens at this level. Do you have like, when people are going through this rent versus buy analysis, is it always a good idea to avoid printer leases, or is there a time to buy, or what do you normally recommend with people? Is it always different?
Well, if I had one message that I would like to scream from the proverbial mountaintop, is I would say, no, don't sign these leases.
Mm.
I think that buyers can do better if they understand the totality of the structure of these leases, or they at least can draw a clear conclusion as to how it's built and if they like it or not. If this particular person knew that his interest was 10% and he was going to pay that on labor and toner and did not care, well, then no harm, no foul. right? At least they knew. But when they are proposed this, the common language that I hear from my clients is the sales reps will say, "What is your budget?" Well, the incumbent tends to know this information, and that incumbent knew the payment was around 650. And so the school of thought tends to be, from a sales perspective, again, part of my training and background, this is how I was taught to sell these machines. If it fit the budget in the past, it'll fit the budget in the future. Don't give away any concessions or price considerations. Don't reduce your price, or don't lose out on your commissions or your profit margins for the company by reducing this too far.
Mm.
So if we use this exact analogy, if that person knew what those options were and they got 20, 30, 40% discount, or they could see that 650 being 350, 400, 450, whatever, if they understood the totality of that formula, that would make a lot of sense. It would give them the control that I think that they deserve. They ought to know the raw data. That's my role, because in almost every contract I looked at, they don't have any uh, file folders or documentation that they were at any level provided the raw data. The goal by the sales rep is to extract enough information to go back to this payment stream, to potentially increase it a little for margin, maybe discount it a couple of points, but not disclose the potential price escalators that might exist in that contract. In the case of our conversation, when you were looking, there's a certain category of buyer that exists out there that's new and or starting, or doesn't have a volume history, a usage history, right? You didn't know
No.
what that was. And there is no way for me or anybody to genuinely provide you that raw data that you would need. I don't have a mechanism, nor would anybody, to guide you down that path of leasing or buying. If they're the seller, they would want you to sign that $200 a month lease. And what I didn't hear you say was, what was that term? That term is going to be probably 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Mhm.
Well, in your case, it was my opinion, and it is for all of my clients. If they're in that situation, we're going to have an hour phone call, which is going to satisfy this. And that's about, ours was half hour, 45 minutes. That information I provide for free, because at the end of the day, volume plays a role in this. You might recall that as our conversation, but if it's a $500 printer and you got yours for $350, it's about that same price to get the toner cartridges. So you almost want to double that number
Right.
in a budgeting mindset. So 700 or 1,000 in this analogy gets you that. And now you have a device that's laser, that has a meter counter, that you can go back to it. And your red flags are going to be, hey, I just ran out of toner. I got to pay some more toner. Remember that? And then after some time, you're going to have a pain point. I think we're spending too much. And then we're going to have another conversation.
Mhm.
And it may or may not be a realistic pain point. You might feel it, but you're going to have to accept that.
Yeah, this
But
might
it's not,
just be what it costs.
that's right.
Right.
And it might not be high enough to take the money you're spending on the desktop printer and that toner and potentially occasional service to go to the lease.
Mhm.
But if you have more paper going through and you have more toner usage and or more service calls and or different needs, different users, you might need to go to a different machine, a little bit more robust. And that would be in the traditional copier floor standing device
Mhm.
that copies, prints, faxes, and scans. I find it real interesting that when it's a desktop printer, we can go online and find a color device, copy, print, fax, and scan, $500, and we don't need a sales rep.
Mhm.
We can get that information online. We can draw our own conclusion. But when it's floor standing, you can't get it. You need the heavily commissioned sales rep to try to persuade you into their way of thinking.
Right.
And I'd say, time out. Let's take a 20-second TV timeout and have a conversation.
Right. Well, it's interesting too because like even at that $500 mark, I mean, I was over at Office Max the other day and they're selling home printers about that same price.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting there thinking like what I've got here is better than 100 different home printers I've ever had. And it's almost the same price as what they've got over here. I'm like, why is that? And I think you were explaining the difference between like laser jet and like whatever ink
Mm-hmm.
toners and just different types of print stuff I never would have thought about. And it's awesome. It like before it would scan and you hear the sound. It'd sound like dial-up internet and it would print
Mm-hmm.
out, with your home computer. And then now it's just I don't know, it just shows up. And I'm like, this is magic. something happens, it becomes magical and it shoots out information. And I'm like, this is awesome. But I guess the point of that is I was kind of blown away with the fact that people were actually marketing leases for $200 a month for several years of a term when I could just buy this for 350 and then buy ink and toner for 350.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what I did. So 3 months would pay off the $600 ish or whatever $700 I paid. And I was going to stuck in something for 5 years. Now I own a printer. I could go sell this. I could get a different one. There's lots of
Correct.
things I can do.
You're in control.
Yeah, but it was just because I thought lease would make sense for me. I was like, well, maybe it would make sense. I don't want to deal with any of the maintenance. I don't want to have to figure out how to, unjam it or whatever. I had a jam the other day. The little screen popped up and said, "Flip open this door, flip, pull out piece of paper, pull it out, flip door back open."
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, okay. Anybody can do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that hard to figure out. And the technology is pretty straightforward as far as a maintenance standpoint. To think that you would give up thousands of dollars because of maintenance convenience when it really is just that easy. It'd probably more of a hassle for me to call somebody, get them over here than it would have me just fix that paper jam. You know what I mean? I think that's another illusion that's sold with the idea of leasing, is that there's going to be all these maintenance headaches, that there could be problems or whatever, and that you're going to be getting all this value by having someone help you service that, when really it's not that much work to do any of the issues that I've ever had. And that was the only thing I can think of that I've had an issue with, and I've had that for a couple months now. You know what I mean?
And that's all good to hear. And that's exactly what I'd hope you to hear. And if your model is to print less, so then you're probably on track for having this for a long period of time.
Yeah.
If your users and or that volume goes up and it becomes cost prohibitive, and or I would argue maybe $100 a month on average, then maybe we, give or take that $100 on a monthly basis, it might make sense to have the conversation and run the numbers. But if it's not, and it's no harm, no foul, fits your budget, well, then you win. And
Mhm.
that's the goal for my clients when I have those. There was a lady that I talked to a couple of months ago that was just taking over a assisted living facility and was in the same situation. And same situation as yours. I just had that same kind of conversation. She doesn't have volume. She doesn't have any history. She doesn't know. And she was staring at these copier proposals that had leases. And she's like, I just don't want to commit because, that's a big responsibility that if that business were to fail, she'd still be responsible for that non-cancelable and irrevocable lease. And if it's for 60 months, whatever that monthly payment is, times that term, plus potential residuals, equals what she'd have to pay. So we don't know, we did not know what she needed and or would use it for in full. We didn't know that volume, but in general, she was going to copy, print, fax, scan, do color like you from time to time. And I said, just go and do that. Same thing.
Right.
Get a $350 desktop and just start tracking your volume. Keep an eye on it. If it starts to become costly and it hits a number that you're not comfortable with, call me back. Let's run those numbers. I'll explain that in a side-by-side comparison. Now, if she got to that, or you get to that, or any client were to get to a desktop printer volume that they just felt was too expensive, and we do our free assessment and we find that it probably makes sense to go that route, that's when I would offer my services to work with them to make sure that they got the best next step, next best contract pricing and terms and conditions, because absent that, they potentially could sign something like this, and that would cost them a lot more than they'd have to spend.
Now, I know this is something that I always wonder when working with people, is how do you get paid? Like, what is, this, obviously you do a lot of consulting up front for free to make sure that you're adding value, that you're kind of understanding what their needs are the
Mhm.
best. But like, at the end of the day, like, what gets you paid?
Well, the current contract, I consider the problem, so we benchmark that.
Okay.
Whatever that is, it is. There's still a lot of digging to find that out. And then we have a conversation. Okay, this is what this contract means. And we get approval from the client. And then we start the RFP process. We ask the vendors the questions, come back, and we get a savings. We get a percentage of the savings.
Right. And if you're saving 50 something percent, it seems like a no brainer.
And the fees that we charge come from the savings that we found. And the reason we find them is because there's no incentive for these monthly payments to drop, so they're almost all going to be the same. So when I get into a situation where I am brought in the middle of the process, and somebody has a $600 or $650 a month payment with the equipment, service, supplies, all the vendors that have bid already are eerily close to that 600.
Mhm.
They asked for this.
Right.
They're smart. They're very well trained. They're very intelligent people, great people. But if they don't have to be completely transparent or operate in interest of full disclosure, if there is no regulatory authority, vendor watchdog mechanism out there, it's a good gig for them.
Well, that's any sales training though, as you
Sure.
mentioned before. I mean, I buy properties every once in a while, and the first thing that happens if you ever meet with an agent to buy a property, which I don't necessarily recommend either, but the first thing they're going to ask you is, well, what's your budget?
Mhm.
And I don't really, I say every time, I don't have a budget.
Mhm.
I want a deal.
Mhm.
And they just don't know what to do. They just
Mhm.
almost go into like this robot freak out mode because
Yep.
they're trained to have a budget, put it into their system, figure out what they can do with their thing. And I don't want that. I
Mhm.
want to look at here's the requirements I'm looking for.
Mhm.
Almost like, it's that systems engineer in me, right? Like let's get the requirements down. That's kind of what you do. Like, what do we need? What are the things that you're looking for exactly? And then we can design to those requirements. And it
Mhm.
becomes much cheaper to do things that way. And that's how you find deals out there. Like if you said, oh, I've got a $450,000 budget for a home, the agent's going to go send you a list of homes for 450,000. But if you said, look, I want a home with a lakefront and I want a big yard, but I want it to be, and I only have 2 kids, so only 3 bedrooms or something like that. Well, now you've got a lot more room to lower that cost. There could be different spots you could find
Mhm.
that would satisfy all those requirements. Now you add another requirement. Well, it's got to be a short commute. It's got to have, an extra bedroom for my in-laws. Okay, now your price goes up.
Mhm.
But the idea is that if you already start with the price, well, you can't go lower than that.
Mm.
And that's, I think, what's happening with a lot of these people, because that makes sense. It's like, what's your budget for printing needs? I'm going to give you a price. Here's somebody $3,600. Okay. Well, that's your price now. You're not going to get anything better than that. Why would you?
Yeah, and, a lot of times the buyers they're also wonderful people. They mean well. They're looking for help, and my argument is they're asking help from the proverbial fox watching the hen house,
Hmm.
and they give this out to the sales rep
Yeah.
so they can say, "Well, yeah, our price is about that too."
Hmm.
That 650 we talked about, or this particular
Or
contract
we can
is,
beat that. We'll go to 3,500 and,
or it'll be 360 or
right.
359 when
Right.
it could have been 200 or 250.
Right.
Who knows? Maybe it's 150.
Right.
But if we don't go to the market with the totality of knowledge and questions that need to be asked of the vendors, in all likelihood, that buyer will not get the best price. They probably won't receive the most fair terms and conditions.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's just one of those things. It seems to be, for whatever reason, someone who I bet you is in a decision making position in their business or organization, they're not thinking about this. You know what I mean? They're not thinking about this the same way that you're like, you guys don't realize what kind of money you're wasting right now.
Mhm,
And they probably don't want to think about it. They
mhm,
probably don't, oh, it sounds boring or whatever. I just have to talk to another guy or whatever. So what is the hook that gets them in? I mean, for me, it's pretty straightforward when you say, look, 3% of your operating income, or excuse me, 3% of your operating expenses is going to be your internal printing needs. We can save you 50% of that. You're going to be seeing probably a percent and a half on in a lot of cases of what can happen depending on working together. I mean, that seems to be a heck of a value proposition that I would look at. I mean, I flip over rocks in this place all day long. I
mhm,
know how business owners think,
mhm,
and that's just what they're looking to do. How can we cut costs and increase our sales? And if you figure ways out to do that, that becomes so valuable. So I think it's what is that message that gets out to people? Like, how do we say, listen, I know it's boring. I know it's not interesting to you. I
mhm.
know it's not what you do, but that's why I'm here. Like,
That's right.
I do this for you so
Mhm,
you don't have to worry about
mhm.
it. So it's just about getting in front of them and just having that message.
Yeah, and I think what you talked a little bit about, the turning over the stones and being a business owner, and you're around business owners, and this is not a real appealing topic, creates a certain complacency with copier contracts.
Hmm.
And that complacency or view of, hey, we're under contract, we got bigger fish to fry, creates a very large vulnerability for the buyer because they poo-poo this. It's no
Yeah.
big deal.
Right.
And when they do that, well, the seller wins and the buyer doesn't win
Right.
as best as they could.
It's a chink in the armor that they can get into.
Correct. And so the challenge is just saying, hey, we do this every day. You do what you do every day very, very well. We do what we do every day very, very well. We're, again, just simply wanting to be an extension of your purchasing or procurement. We want to be on that team and not your payroll. We're going to collaborate together. We're going to copy your team on every email so they have the chance to ask questions throughout. And usually by the time we're done with the project, they're not asking questions because they've had them answered already. and they see the process unfold. So they're very satisfied, and our testimonials prove that out. Uh, the idea that copiers are a potential savings for them is true, and it is the nearly 100% the case on every contract I've read and every client I've had. And then we have conversations at some point about their telecom and their mobile platform in shipping and freight. And if they have any issues or interest in any of those categories, I'm interested in facilitating intro to that business associate that I have so that they can save money in that area.
Right.
And we share referrals back and forth. So I hope I answered your question. But
Absolutely. And I think that's the beauty of this industry in a lot of ways. It's something that just gets put on the back burner like most other things. You're busy. If you're, a health administrator at a hospital, that's your job. You're not thinking about how to minimize your office expenses, how to, cut costs here and there. But I bet you if somebody could come in and help you out, figure that out quickly, and then when it comes time at the end of the fiscal year to review your financial statements, becomes a lot more valuable now. And I think those are the things that any savvy business person will do is they will look at the line items. They will criticize, and they will look with a crucial eye at every single piece of that line item in the income statement. Every year I spend a ton of time with like, how do I save one more dollar here? Or how do I make one more dollar here? Like, that's the business. And if people aren't looking at every one of these things, they're like, oh, this is just kind of what it is in anything. That's a problem as the business acumen side of a business leader. And I think that what you're showing here is like, look, this is an opportunity that you might not think about that is there for any business leader. This is an opportunity that's very straightforward that we have proven results for. It might be boring, which is why I'm here, because I can help you. I love boring. I dig into the boring. I'll dig in through your freaking thick contracts and talk about your printer release statement, and I can take care of that for you. So I think, just listening to you and having this discussion today, that there's a ton of value for people to at least reach out and just have a conversation, because like I said, there's potential savings here in almost all of your cases. And in a lot of cases, depending on the size of the volume, it sounds like there's even more opportunity. And that's really a pretty cool thing for people to at least know when it's come time to lean things out, they have somebody they can call.
Yeah, and it seems to me that in most of the cases that I've worked on, large, medium, or small, that particular buyer, maybe they're the information gatherer or they are the actual ultimate decision maker, does not have any background in copiers at any level. And they are in that position because of training and expertise, and they tend to get good deals. I just think that a collaboration here gets better deals.
Right.
It improves that process. And my goal in collaborating is I don't have an interest in their job. I just want to improve their market or their budget, and I want them to find more working capital and look good for their boss. That's all I really care about, because at the end of the day, I created this unique model because I know it the most and I'm passionate about it, and we find savings and people win.
Right.
The buyers win. And I think, even the vendors win. They're just held a little bit more accountable.
Yeah. And I think buyers need to realize that, in a lot of cases too, their bosses are trying to get them to pinch pennies and save money too. And this is a great opportunity to do that. Well, Al, do you have any parting words for our discussion today that you'd like to kind of share? How can people find you, get a hold of you, reach out?
If they go to our website, copierconsultingllc.com, they can reach out through the Contact Us page, or they can reach me direct at my email. That is al at copierconsultingllc.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. If you listen this far, you might have an opportunity to save yourself or save your business quite a bit of money with something that you might not have thought of before. So thank you so much today, Al.
All right. Thanks a lot, Aaron. Appreciate it.